Could you define specifically what you mean by imperialism?
When I talk about imperialism, I'm talking about the fact that there is a form of economic organization inside of this country and inside of this world. The form of economic organization inside of this country is one whereby the fundamental means of production, the factories, the mines, the basic economic infrastructure is controlled by a relatively small number of people. That on the other side you have labor, the persons who enter the economy and have nothing to do but exchange their labor, work, for wages. The wages are generally very small, just that minimum that is necessary to sustain them on a minimum level, and the rest of that is what we call surplus value. In a Marxist-Leninist analysis, that is surplus value is exploited, it's characterized as profits, it goes to the ruling class. When the domestic capitalists, the cats in America, the ruling class, enter other countries in two ways. One, they enter by financial penetration, that is to say investment in other countries. You see it everywhere, South Africa, Chrysler Corporation, all over the world. You see it with the wage price free situation that's taking place right now, for example. When they penetrate other countries through the use of the exportation of capital or direct investment in those other countries, and when they couple that, of course, with the use of this elaborate military machine to smash national liberation struggles that take place in other countries, which struggles might result, for example, in the expropriation of the ruling class over here, kicking out taking their companies over, this kind of thing. So when I talk about imperialism, I want to put it, like in terms that I hope can be understood. I'm simply talking about capitalism leaving the borders of the United States, number one, through the mechanism of financial penetration and the acquisition of markets in those other countries, and the use of the fist, the gun, and the club, and the force of the armed military apparatus of the state to smash liberation struggles wherever they might occur in the world, because those liberation struggles are headed fundamentally in the direction of socialism and therefore are unalterably opposed to the continued existence of the capitalist rule and domain over the entire world. So that's what I mean by imperialism. It is the fundamental enemy. We understand that we are black, we understand that our oppression has a national character, but we also understand that if it were not profitable for the capitalist and the international capitalist to be called the imperialist, if it was not profitable for those elements to subject us to exploitation on the basis of our race, they wouldn't do it. It simply wouldn't make sense. So what I'm suggesting is to whatever extent we are discriminated against, and that's very clear to all of us, we've still got to recognize that fundamentally we're dealing with a system that is run on a logic that says we must extract as much profit as possible for those who own and control the means of production, and the hell with the rest of the world. So I'm saying that that's the fundamental enemy. The same Chrysler Corporation in America that can join forces with such things as the Urban Coalition and talk about redeveloping inner cities and solving those problems are the same Chrysler Corporations or Ford Motor Companies which are exploiting and extracting surplus value from black workers under apartheid system in South Africa, for that matter over the entire world. So that's what I mean, just generally speaking, Tony, about imperialism. It is our enemy. The people have the capacity, the people have the right, the people have the duty to rise up, to seize power, and to run this society in such a way as to produce not profit for the few, but to produce on the basis of meeting the needs of the people who live in the world.
Well, as a lawyer, you used the word to smash and destroy. What functionally could you do as a lawyer in terms of...
There's a number of things, Tony. I just want to cite one example, and I think the brothers could probably join in at some point. In terms of this, I cite one example of a case that I was involved in. I was involved in a case called the James Johnson case in Detroit, where there was a black worker who was born in Mississippi who had been subjected to conditions of a colonialistic kind of form of upraising. He was born on a plantation and so on. This brother finally made it through in the course of his life up to about age 30. He found himself working in an automobile plant, a Chrysler Corporation plant in the city of Detroit. The conditions at the point of production where he was caught up in those contradictions were such that finally one day this brother got fired. He went home, got a carbine, returned to the plant, shot down 2 foremen and 1 job setter. We defended this brother. We had the following objectives in mind. One, we had the objective, of course, of demonstrating as clearly as we could to people the contradictions that exist, in terms of workers at the point of production. We exposed the conditions of the plant. We exposed the role of international imperialist corporations as being essentially exploiters of the surplus value of workers. We exposed the racial conditions, the colonial conditions, if you will, as Fanon writes about him in The Wretched of the Earth. We exposed the conditions of his upbringing. We demonstrated to the people that, in fact, this man was not responsible for those homicides, that, in fact, the Chrysler Corporation and the existence of a racist imperialist system which has denied him systematically every possible opportunity for productive participation in life were, in fact, the true culprits in this case. We were able to convince the jury through a number of mechanisms that this was, in fact, the case, and this man who shot down these 3 people was acquitted. The importance of that case was understood not only in Detroit, not only throughout the country, but indeed throughout the world. Even Time magazine had to give it a play. But my point is that that was a classic instance in which you go into court. You don't go into court on the defensive. You don't go into court saying that, like they style a criminal prosecution, the people of the state of New York or the people of the city of Michigan. We indicate to the jury the people ain't got nothing to do with no crap like this, that it ain't the people, that it's the state apparatus, the prosecutors, and the judges who are nothing but flunkies for the imperialist ruling class, They understood that. We demonstrated to the people what those conditions were. The people indicated that they had had their level of political consciousness raised to such a point that they were not prepared to simply blindly ratify a judgment that would call this man a criminal. He was not a criminal. The system is a criminal. The imperialists are the criminals, and they understood that. Classic way. So what I'm trying to say in closing, okay? A lot of people say that you cannot be revolutionary and be a lawyer. A lot of people say that when you work inside of the legal system, you're working as a reformist. I don't have that view. I don't think Haywood has that view. I don't think that Bill has that view. You go into the court and you try to do two things, particularly where there are people who are involved in struggle or where there are people whose concrete situation is one which can be used to educate. You go in to demystify the system. You go in to expose the contradictions of the legal system. You go in to exploit every possible option that still exists in this kind of like pre-revolutionary period. And I think that that's a very positive and, you know, like incredibly important function. There are other examples that possibly we can get into at a later time, but that concretely, brother, is what I mean.
Something very strange happened, and I want to bring this to your attention because it requires your attention, it requires your thought, and I want you to focus on this. There was a man, he was a cryptocurrency millionaire. And as you know, there's a lot going on in the crypto world right now. And one of the things that is going on is that a lot of very young crypto millionaires and billionaires are being found dead. In the last couple of weeks, 3 of them have been found dead in mysterious circumstances, okay? So Nikolai Meshugian, pardon me, 29 years old, he died on October 28th, hours after tweeting that he feared the CIA and the Mossad were going to murder him. It's not a conspiracy theory. He tweeted this actually. His tweet read, quote, "The CIA and the Mossad and pedo elite are running some kind of sex trafficking, entrapment, blackmail ring out of Puerto Rico and the Caribbean islands. They are going to frame me with a laptop planted by my ex-girlfriend who was a spy. They will torture me to death." A blackmail ring operating out of Puerto Rico and the Caribbean. The Caribbean, obviously, well, one thing that's true is that Epstein had an island in the Caribbean, right? Just off the coast of St. Thomas and Tortola. It was an island, Little St. James. That is where his island was. And again, it was a theory that he was a part of a blackmail ring. But that sounds crazy. This guy tweets this. Okay, doesn't mean that it's true. He tweets that. And then what happens? 4 hours later, he was found dead. He was found dead by a surfer in Puerto Rico. And you might think, okay, Candace, well, maybe he went for a swim and he happened to drown. Maybe he didn't know that he couldn't swim. Maybe the waves were bad that day and he went for a swim. I want to believe that because I would much rather believe that there was not something sinister going on in our world. I'd much rather believe that this was just odd timing that he drowned. Except the facts around this case are that he was found in all of his clothes, as well as having his wallet in his pocket, okay? So you would have to believe that he regularly went for a swim in all of his clothes and with his wallet in Puerto Rico after tweeting that he thought that the CIA and the Mossad were going to kill him. That's what you would have to believe if you wanted to stay on the side of believing that there was not something more sinister happening. That wasn't his only tweet, by the way. He also tweeted 3 possible futures for me. 1, suicided by CIA. 2, CIA brain damage slave asset. 3, worst nightmare of people who effed with me up until now. I am sure these are the only options. He tweeted that on September 4th. And that if I read that tweet and he was still alive, I would think that he was just crazy, but he's not. He is dead. He's not the only person in the crypto world, as I mentioned earlier, that has died. There was another man named Tantan Kullander, 30 years old, who died in his sleep last week, which is bizarre. And there was another one who just died yesterday. His name is Vyacheslav Taran, pardon my pronunciation here, 53 years old. He died after his helicopter plunged near the resort town in Switzerland after taking off from Lausanne on a clear day. They have no understanding of why this helicopter would have crashed. There was no weather issues. And there was another person that was supposed to get onto the helicopter that last minute decided not to. So, yeah, it is getting a bit strange. And I am not sure what is going on. I do not believe that all of these people are dying in mysterious circumstances and that they're all just happening upon their deaths accidentally. I am fearful to even have this discussion. You know, I think it's a scary idea. It's scary. My brain does not want to believe that there can be this many pedophiles in power. It does not want to believe that there can be something sinister happening that our CIA, that our intelligence agencies are involved in. But I do know that this story scares me, and it's important that I bring it to the forefront and that you know that it is taking place. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
We just had a bomb go off, and we knew that this was coming, and Putin knew that this was coming. You have warmongers Condoleezza Rice and Bob Gates, Robert Gates, just published a brand new article in the Washington Post calling for all-out war against Russia. I love that the Washington Post just gives them a platform to spew this agenda, but it comes directly from the intelligence state. Then the Washington Post publishes it, and this, of course, is the new marching orders for the neoconservatives in Washington. And Democrats, they're all on board with this. The article is called "Time is Not on Ukraine's Side." And it's a direct call to action to send a massive buildup of weapons and forces to fight Russia. Now, remember, Condoleezza Rice is a war criminal whose illegal war in Iraq led to the deaths of millions of people. That's on her resume. And then she's been calling for a war with Russia for over a decade now. Here she is 8 years ago laying out how Russia is trying to change the unipolar order.
And when great powers start behaving badly, it gets really dangerous. We have now, I think, a very dangerous, perfect storm between a leader who is unreconciled to the post-war, post-Cold War order in Europe, willing to use a combination of economic pressure, military force, intimidation, and surrogates to get his way to try to undo that order.
So Condoleezza Rice has been pushing for a confrontation with Putin for a very long time. Her words should not be taken lightly. We now have a new bloodthirsty Congress with a new Speaker of the House last night, Kevin McCarthy, the guy who literally wears a Ukrainian flag pin and had dinner with Klaus Schwab and promised to fund an endless war in Ukraine last week. So if you don't think for a second that crap is about to hit the fan, then you are not paying attention. Maybe a lot of people are still in their Christmas fog and they're, still drunk or hungover. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think so, buddy. And also, it's a little bit too convenient for me that your prescriptions to save the planet are accompanied by this insistence that the only way forward to that is to give you all the power. It's like there's a bit of a moral hazard in that, don't you think? It's like, I'm just saving the planet. Give me all the power. It's like, you want to save the planet, or do you want the power? And let's put the second one first, because the probability that you're a saint or the Messiah is pretty damn low. Well, we don't have one problem, carbon dioxide, which is, I don't even think it's clear that carbon dioxide is actually a problem, but we can leave that aside. That'll get me in trouble with the College of Psychologists again. But, Lomborg says,
it's
look,
a factor.
Yeah, it's a factor, yeah. But there's lots of factors, and God only knows what the most pressing problems that confront us truly are. When I wandered through the ecological sustainability literature about 10 years ago, and, I concluded a couple of things. One was that the best way forward to a sustainable planet is to make everyone who's poor rich as fast as you possibly can.
And that's Lomborg's position,
not to put limits to growth on, because it turns out if you get people above about $5,000 a year in average GDP, they start taking a long-term view of the future instead of scrabbling around in the dirt trying to get lunch, and you're going to burn everything up around you to stay alive if you have to.
Right.
But if you got a bit of wealth and now you can think over, maybe a 20-year period, which is quite the damn luxury, then you actually start being concerned about, the quality, the aesthetic quality of the local environment. And so I was so excited when I found that data, because I thought, oh, this is so cool. It means that we could have our cake and eat it too. We could work really hard to provide cheap, reliable energy, at the lowest cost possible to the widest number of people worldwide. And the emergent consequence of that would be the whole planet would clean itself up. So wouldn't that be great? Because we could make our goal the eradication of absolute poverty, which we actually done pretty good at eliminating over the last 15 years, but we could really make that a goal. And then one of the consequences of that, inevitable consequences, would be a greener and healthier planet. And then you think, well, why aren't we doing that? And that's a question, all right. And I think part of the reason is I've been trying to understand the driving ideas underneath this globalist utopian tyranny that seems to be developing from the top down. And I think it's driven, at least in part, by this religious vision that I already described, that you have to construe culture itself, especially industrial culture, as the tyrannical father raping and pillaging everything in its way, which is an unbelievably dangerous way to think, too one-sided. And the idea that you have to impose limits to growth on people in order to have a sustainable planet. And that's allied with a view that probably stems all the way back to people like Paul Ehrlich in the 1960s, who really believe, truly, that maybe the planet should only have 500 million people on it, or 1 billion, in relative poverty, or 2 billion barely scraping by, because otherwise they're going to be wrecking everything, and controlled by some top-down authority that makes bloody well sure that no one's consuming too much. And so when I look at ideas like that first assumption, the planet has too many people on it, it's like, I don't like to hear people say that, because when I hear that, I think, okay, buddy, who exactly are you thinking about getting rid of? Oh, well, it's not like that. It's like, yeah, it's like that.
It has to be like that.
It is absolutely like that. And so, it's easy to get all paranoid conspiracy theorist about the WEF, say, and maybe there's some utility in that. But, I don't think anybody's sitting at Davos going, well, we got to scrap 7 billion people. But if the underlying narrative is the one I just described, virginal planet, tyrannical patriarchy, and rapacious individual, and you believe, well, we're overpopulated, like Paul Ehrlich has believed since really literally the mid-1960s, then how is it not going to be that the policies that you craft stemming from that narrative are colored by the belief that there's far too many people? And I've really felt that I've been at war for the last 6 months. And I would say it's war because what I observed happening in Europe when I was there last was that, well, and you can see this, you don't have to be in Europe to see it, but it's more direct if you're there, is that it's pretty damn clear that the globalist utopians are willing to sacrifice the poor for the sake of the planet. And they're doing that by cranking energy prices up through the roof, and that means that people die. Lomborg has estimated that maybe you have to turn your thermostat down by 3 degrees, right? Save the planet. We don't have enough energy. We'll pay you not to use your electricity between 5 and 6, which is what they're doing in the UK. You turn your damn thermostat down 3 degrees, that sounds like nothing. But if you're old, that radically increases the probability that you'll get a respiratory disease and die. And if the Europeans would have had a cold winter, and that could still happen, Lomborg estimated it'd wipe out 135,000 people. It's like, well, we're just making energy more expensive. It's like, what do you mean you're just doing that? So imagine the economic system. It's a pyramid. There's a bunch of people at the top. They have almost all the money. That's par for the course for any productive system. Any system that's productive ends up with a distribution like that. It's like a law of nature. And then you move farther down the pyramid till you get down to the bottom where most of the people are, and they're barely clinging on to the edge of reality, right? It doesn't take much of a crisis to tip them into death. And then you crank up energy prices. Well, what happens is you just take a bunch of those people at the bottom of the distribution, the poor that the left is so, hypothetically concerned with, and they're just done. They go from barely hanging on to not hanging on. And their kids go from having some ghost of a chance of opportunity to having none. And I could see this coming. You really saw it happening in Germany and the UK, where we have this absolute rat's nest of way more expensive energy. And this is where it gets extremely perverse. You might say, okay, look, we have to save the future poor. And so now some of the present poor are going to have to suffer. Well, that's convenient for you if you happen not to be one of those poor people, but let's give the devil his due and say, okay. It's like, that'd be fine with me. Not really. That'd be fine with me if the consequence of your actions, raising energy prices, for example, actually produced an improvement in those things you wanted to improve. So, for example, energy is more expensive, but now the air is cleaner. But that isn't what's happened in Germany.
Right.
What's happened in Germany is energy is like 5 times as expensive, and the coal plants are back on. So it's like, even by your own criteria for success, you failed, and you did it at the expense of the poor. And, the World Bank estimated, I don't remember how many months ago, it's probably 9 months ago, that we're putting 350 million people on the brink of starvation because we're cranking energy prices up. And so for me, it's like, that's 350 million people. That's 3 times as many as the communists killed, in their 6 decades of trying. And if your cure for the planet is, well, we got to put 350 million poor people in jeopardy just so that things are hypothetically better in 100 years, I think.
The idea that we're going to send in offensive equipment and have planes and tanks and trains going in with American pilots and American crews, just understand, and don't kid yourself, no matter what you all say, that's called World War III, okay? Let's get it straight here, guys. That old expression, don't kid a kidder.
Yeah, that's World War III. So ahead of Biden's tank announcement, the Russians already knew what was coming. They're not stupid, and launched the Russian frigate, the Admiral Gorshakov, which is armed with an arsenal of nuclear-capable hypersonic missiles. Here's the map. This this frigate, is now sailing westwards, right towards the United States, with nuclear weapons, hypersonic missiles. And we've already seen reports that near Hawaii, etc. So much for cooler heads prevailing in any of this. Not going to happen. But when you have Germany coming out declaring that we are at war with Russia, we're at war with Russia, and here's the tanks to prove it. So these tanks will show up. We just got reports a few minutes ago that the 100 or so older Leopard tanks are coming in through Poland. Those should be arriving like within the next day or two. And Russia has already said, hey, when these things arrive, they will be destroyed the moment they arrive. So,
well,
okay.
and what a way to ultimately thank them for what they did in World War II. The Russians liberating and helping them. Like,
right.
Thanks for the help, but you know what? Now we don't like you.
Right, and these are the same leaders that are telling us that we can't drive gas-driven cars. But marching this weaponry, gas-powered weaponry, straight into battle to be released into the atmosphere. So wait till you hear this upcoming report about electric vehicles. It's going to make you even madder when you realize they want you to walk. Like literally, researchers are saying, yeah, EVs are not going to actually get us where we need to go, but you can start walking more often. We're going to build cities for you.
The United States has dropped an average of 46 bombs every day for the last 20 years. Now, I don't know. This story showed up in Salon.com. Again, no mention of it in corporate media. Why? Because if you turn on MSNBC or you turn on CNN or Fox News, they're going to be you'll see advertisements by Raytheon, advertisements by the big weapons industry. Are you going to go out and buy a missile? No. Why are they advertising? Why are they going to MSNBC and running all those ads? For access. So nobody will talk about the kind of thing we're going to talk about right now. Pick the story up.
Yeah, this is truly terrifying to think about. But as you said, 46 bombs per day over the last 20 years. And of course, a lot of that happened, in the Iraq War and Afghanistan. But it hasn't ended, right? We're not at the point where we're not dropping any bombs per day now.
Right.
Bombs get dropped by the United States every single day, not just on average, but every day we're bombing somebody somewhere for whatever reason they've come up with that day.
Okay, well, what I think is important about this is this report that is supposed to come out regularly. This is supposed to be a regular report, has been stifled, for 21 months?
Yeah.
Now, who's been in charge for the last 12 months at least? Who is in charge? It's the Democrats and it's the Republicans. They know how important this report is, because it gives us an insight into how big our weapons industry has become. Weapons industry in the United States probably is the #1 most profitable industry in the United States, besides pharmaceuticals. And so right now, we start seeing, it's important that we know that 337,000 bombs and missiles have been released in everywhere from Syria to Yemen, you name it, we've dropped them. Nobody's paid attention to. We've dropped them out of drones. But the point to this story, where I landed with this story, is it's been a big secret. And it wasn't just the Republicans, it was the Democrats that kept it a big secret. We're under a siege warfare mentality. And we're doing it not for national security all the time, but because the weapons industry has such a huge impact on what our politicians do.
And this chart here, which I love, that came with this story, as I mentioned, obviously we had Iraq, we have Syria, we have Afghanistan and Yemen. which, you know, totally unjustifiable for what we're doing over there. But there's also this number right here at the bottom.
Yeah.
28,217 bombs dropped in other countries. So not Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, or Yemen.
What are the other countries?
wars? Exactly. Where are these bombs being
This
dropped?
is America's. We are now the premier weapons maker in the world, and it's our economy.
Yep.
This is Boeing economy. This is Raytheon economy. And to hell with how many bombs we drop. To hell with whether or not it creates new Cold Wars with places like Russia and China. We have a weapons industry completely unregulated. There's nobody controlling that throttle. This air power, it's called the Air Power Summaries. That's the report. That's the report that all this is taken from. That's the report that was been suppressed by 2 administrations.
And it's supposed to come out every month. We're supposed to see how many bombs are being dropped. But look, you point out this should be the national symbol of the United States. It's not a bald eagle. It's this
It's a
missile right
missile,
here.
yeah.